Welcome to the place where we learn about improv, 'cause public speaking can take you so far. Improvisely speaking, say yes and flex your creative thinking. Improvisely speaking, say yes and flex your creative thinking.
Welcome, everyone, to the Improvly Speaking podcast, the podcast where we explore all things public speaking, improv, performance, communication, creativity, and everything else in between. I am so excited for our guest today. Our guest today does all of those things, focuses on all of those things, and much more, with a focus also on burnout. I'm so excited and interested to get into this conversation, and I hope you will enjoy this conversation as much as I will. So let me get to it. Let me introduce our guest today, Jim Young. Jim is a men's burnout and leadership coach. He worked 25 years in the tech world, and 10 of those years were as a senior executive, where he experienced severe burnout. He now teaches men how to prevent and defeat burnout to reduce stress, regain energy and drive, and feel like a better human being. He is also an improviser and professional comedian, and he teaches applied improv trainings. Woohoo! I can't wait to talk about that. He has a new book coming out, actually now it's out, called Expansive Intimacy: How Tough Guys Defeat Burnout. Please welcome the amazing and talented Jim Young.
Dana, thank you so much. It's so good to see you again. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit about how we met. And that's such a wonderful intro. Those are all lovely things that I love to do. And glad to also be a guest on your podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on, Jim. We have a lot of things in common, a lot of things to talk about. And yeah, we met, for our listeners, we met in a risk takers accountability group, which is so funny. I love that name. It was run by Angela Lucier, and we haven't met in a while. It was probably last year we did it, and we would meet every week and talk about the things that scare us and what we're doing to fix those things and get over that fear. And we all really helped each other. It was such a great accountability group, aptly called. And I met so many wonderful people, including you. So that was such a great start. I have to thank Angela for that, too.
For sure. I've known Angela for a bunch of years. We live in the same area. And she's been one of those people who I just see as a risk taker. And it's so funny that that's where we met, because I remember several years ago having a conversation with my coach when I was first starting off in business. And I was nervous about something. I think it was around marketing. And I said to her, I'm like, I'm just not much of a risk taker. And that's not really true. And now I just jump into those risk taking groups and I meet cool people.
Yeah. And I remember in that group, I mentioned that I'm doing improvisation trainings, applied improv, and you messaged me and said, hey, I do those too. Let's chat offline. And I did take you up on your offer to help me organize a few of my thoughts on my trainings. I just appreciate your time and energy, willing to help. I could tell just from our few interactions that you're such a giver and you want to help people. And I mean, your business is called The Centered Coach. So I feel like coaching comes natural to you, but what does that name mean to you?
Yeah, thanks. And that spirit of giving has really been something I've received a lot of. So I'm just trying to give it back. And when I hear there's a place I might be able to help somebody else in some way, it just lights me up. The name, to your question, The Centered Coach, is something that came to me in a, excuse me, that name came to me in a workshop that I was doing several years ago. It was just before I left my last corporate gig, where I was in the depths of burnout. And I went to a workshop, a guy named Ari Weinzweig, the founder of Zingerman's, which is a hugely successful food store in the Midwest. And he was giving this talk and workshop around vision. And we did a visioning exercise where we just for 5 minutes had to write without letting our pen stop. It calls it a hot pen technique around this vision of the future we were going to live into. And I chose around my work, and I wrote down, I still have that sheet of paper. I look at it every once in a while, and I wrote down this phrase amongst 3 pages or whatever that I wrote, that I wanted to help people find the calm, centered place from which they did their best at work and in life. And when it came time to name my business, once I knew I wanted to go into coaching, the name Jim Young's pretty common. I wanted something that'd be a little bit easier for people to find, maybe. And I thought, oh, it's the centered coach. And that's how the name came to be.
I love that. That's such a great background story to your business name and your coaching method. And I took a note on the hot pen technique. That's super cool. And that just encourages creativity, gets you out of your head, so you're not thinking, oh, I didn't say that sentence right. Just write for 5 minutes. Don't think about it. Don't think how it sounds. Don't think how it'll be received. Just write.
That's
I
right.
love that.
No editing at all. And the creativity just starts to flow out of you eventually. You might get into a place where you're stuck and you're writing, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. And then a thought will come and you follow it. And it's magical.
It is. Oh, that's a great creativity tip for just right off the bat. Amazing. Well, and Jim, in the spirit of sharing too, if you're comfortable, I want to ask you about your burnout journey. I follow a lot of female burnout stories and people. And I think when I think of burnout, sometimes I hear a lot from females. And so I love this focus on males because I think we can all benefit from a focus on burnout and preventing it. So, if you don't mind sharing your burnout story and why you specifically focus on men and burnout amongst men.
Sure. I'll share it in a couple of stories that connect and then into the bigger picture of where it landed. When I was 9 years old, my mom kicked out her abusive alcoholic boyfriend. And that was a relief. And it was also a little bit scary because now there was this vacancy in the house. And I remember it was a Tuesday night. And my mom said to me, I was about 9 years old at the time. She said, it's Tuesday night. It's time to take out the trash. And since you're man of the house, you need to take out the trash. It's very traditional thinking, of course, back in the 70s. And as a 9-year-old kid, kind of in this tender place, not knowing what was going on in my household, I heard those words and probably had a lot of thoughts race through my mind, probably had a lot of feelings come up. And I quickly shut all of those down. And I said, I need to help out. I need to do my job. I need to man up. Is probably a phrase that if it had been popular at the time, I might have even thought of. And I grabbed the trash and I figured out how to carry a big heavy bag down the stairs and across the parking lot to the dumpster. And I write about that story in the book about how that seeded this belief in me that I could be this hero. I could help other people. And sometimes it was by shutting down my own emotions or feelings or fears and just doing what was hard because it made other people's lives easier. And that's really the first place that burnout that I know of, that it started to take root in me. Later on in my early 20s, I had this other seminal experience around my future father-in-law. I first met him and was being introduced to him that day at his house with my girlfriend. And he asked me what I did for work. And I didn't have a good answer. I had gotten out of college and was just kind of doing odd jobs. I wasn't serious, didn't have a purpose. And I felt sheepish about that. And we had this conversation where I kind of was dancing around that. And eventually, he kind of asked me, like, what did I see myself doing in the long run? And I said, well, the thing is, I'm not a morning person. And he kind of looked at me funny, like, what does that have to do with anything? And I said, I just don't see myself getting up early in the morning, putting on a tie and going into an office, which is sort of the archetypical thing I would do as a guy with a business degree. And of course, this is what he'd been doing for decades, for his whole life, and was very financially successful and otherwise. And so I not only pissed off my future father-in-law in that moment, but I probably also had him think, like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? And then flash forward 6 months, I'm getting up early in the morning, putting on a tie, going into an office to make a salary to support my family. And so again, giving away what I intuitively knew to go satisfy societal expectations. And those are really the stories that led me into a really deep pattern of doing that, putting myself aside to prove myself to others according to society's expectations.
Yeah, I I feel those. I feel those stories in one way or another, and just hearing the terms man up and man of the house. And I think those terms are still used today too. Yeah, it's creating a cycle in men. And then, women are told different things. It creates a cycle in them. And I'm curious to hear, so, you conformed to societal expectations. How did you discover burnout in the workplace? It hit you as a senior executive. When did you decide it was time to leave and do this new business?
Burnout washed over me for really a period of years. I think I was in it for probably 5 or 7 years on somewhere along the spectrum of burnout, moving from one job to another to try and escape it, thinking it was something wrong with the job or the role or my colleagues, eventually me. That was the biggest thing I was afraid of like, well, what if I can't hack it? Eventually I got to a place where I just could not function anymore. I actually had to leave in the middle of a whole bunch of activity in my job. I was in a senior role. I had a ton of responsibility in an organization. I had just gone through a divorce 6 months prior. I was trying to figure out life as a single dad, half time, moving, working a really crazy job. And I lost my grandmother, who was a caregiver of mine as a child, all around the same time. And I'm just trying to continue to do it all without taking a break, without any support. And I literally had to just stop in my boss's office and say, I need to step away, and I don't know when I'm coming back. I'm going to take some time. Ended up being a month. And that was really the first time that I had recognized something was wrong. I didn't know that it was called burnout at the time, but I knew there was something that just wasn't right.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that can be hard to share. I imagine you share some of that in your book, which I am getting in the mail hopefully this week too, and I can't wait to read it. But I know that can be hard to share, but also helpful to share because it puts a name, for others. It's like, oh, wait, I'm feeling those things too. And I didn't realize that was burnout. Having this burnout name, I don't know if we had that before COVID. Burnout's been a really popular term during COVID, and just having a term to call it, I think, is so helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting because burnout has been a quantified malady for probably about 30 years. The first researchers started doing work in the 70s around this phenomenon that was showing up primarily in healthcare settings first, and continues to be a big issue there. But the World Health Organization classified it in the ICD-11, back in 2019. So that's, I can remember what that's for, but that's the official listing of diseases and disorders. And burnout is classified in there as a workplace disorder, essentially. And it has three components: exhaustion, mental, physical, emotional; cynicism, or depersonalization, when we kind of stop thinking of other people as human, is one way. And the third symptom is a sense of inefficacy, that we can't get our job done anymore. So it's been around for a while. I think the pandemic got us to focus on it because we could see things aren't right here, and it's been lurking underneath, and we've sort of pulled back the curtains on it now.
Yeah, and not to say I'm glad, I guess, to find the right words, but it is nice to have a light shined on this issue. Unfortunately, we had to go through a worldwide pandemic to see it and experience it collectively as a group of human beings. But the light has been shined on it. So now what are we going to do about it? We know there's an issue about burnout, and we know there's a lot of people experiencing it. And I see some more empathetic to burnout than others, right? And saying, "Oh, it's just a term, like get over it, suck it up, Buttercup," kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's not something you can suck it up, right? It's not something you just get over. You have to do a lot of work to prevent burnout and then to overcome burnout if you're in it.
Yeah. And the other topic that came up, especially when I was writing the book, I saw this, and it's one of those things you see and you don't want to see it. You wish you could unsee it. Because I didn't want to write about it, was that certainly from a perspective of men, and I imagine it's true for other genders as well, there's this shame around, if I'm burned out, there's something wrong with me. I'm defective. I'm not good enough. That notion, though, of shame is something that is such a powerful force, because we don't want to admit, certainly as men, that we can't handle it. And so when I started to see that in the research I was doing, in the conversations I was having, and then as I reflected deeply on some of my own stories, I realized, oh man, here it comes. And I have to deal with it, because if I just pretend that everything's okay, I just double down in the pattern of burnout. I try to outwork it. I try to hide myself. And that's a trap. That's the trap I was stuck in for several years, to the point where I kind of broke down, and I had to admit that I couldn't handle it, because the consequences were about to get really dire.
Yeah, I'm thinking through my own kind of burnout experience. And I think the first time it hit me was, well, you mentioned like you kind of had a perfect storm of issues that came up, and life issues, divorce, and your grandma passing away, and work's getting hard, and nothing's kind of stopping for you. Like life still goes on, even though you have all these issues. And it's almost like, can I just hit the pause button? But we feel like we can't say that. Like, hey, I need a break. But it's like, oh, I can't say I need a break. What will people think of me if I need a break?
Yeah.
I'm a leader. Like if I take a break, what is that going to mean for others?
Yeah.
And I think of that in my own burnout journey too. 29, and I've only been in my career, I'll say, for about 10 years now. And just in 2019, I had gotten some more responsibility at work. We had a coworker that left, that put a lot more work on me. I took on more clients, and I found myself within 1 month having 3 breakdowns, just crying and feeling like it's not enough, and feeling like I don't have enough time to do all the things. What if I don't get it all done? The clients are going to want to drop me, and all this stuff. And by the 3rd breakdown, it happened at work. The other 2 were at home at night, kind of feeling sorry for myself. The 3rd one happened at work, and I could not stop crying. And it was over something so small. It was the smallest. I mean, when it happened, right, it was like a huge issue of gift cards weren't going to arrive in time for an event. So we wouldn't be able to give the gift cards out after the biometric screening. We would have to mail them to people later, right? In hindsight, you're like, that's not that big of a deal, Dana, right? But at the time, something didn't go right, and I was going to let my clients down. I started crying at work. I couldn't stop. I was like, luckily my coworkers weren't around, so I just left. I drove home. I cried the whole way home. I mean, luckily I could see, right? And then got home, kept crying for another hour, and finally didn't have any more tears to cry. And I felt a little bit better that I at least got some of those emotions out.
Yeah.
But I remember trying to find resources to help me. And I used our EAP program, and I called, and they gave me some numbers for therapists. All of them were booked, so that didn't work. I ended up finding a coach to help me, and I don't think she called it burnout, but essentially it was. She was helping to coach me on burnout. And but I had to pay out of pocket to do it. And I remember my husband going, "That's a lot of money. Like, what is this going to help? Blah, blah, blah." I was like, I need to do something. Like, I need I need this. And it did help me. It really did, but it was only a month-long program. I probably needed more of it. But just anyway, I go in my story just to mention like the lack of resources there to help. And I think we've come a long way since COVID, happened, and a focus on burnout. There are more resources out there. So just to throw it back to you, you hear this kind of story, I imagine, with other people, some version like that. How do you coach them on their burnout prevention or journey? How do you help them through it?
So much of it to me is normalizing it. And that's why I share my story. That's why I love you sharing your story just now. And when we see those vulnerable spaces that people show up in and say, yeah, this is me too, that I feel like, okay, I'm not some outlier. I'm not some weirdo. This is a normal condition. And our culture has created conditions that make it so easy to burn out. I write about this in the book as well, that for men, there's a set of unspoken rules that we're socialized into. We don't show our emotions, certainly, especially not to other men. We need to look like we're in control, like we're successful. We can't ask for help. We just have to man up. No matter what's going on, we've got to have it all fine. And women have this, have a very similar thing. I've heard Brene Brown talk about this, you can never let them see you sweat. You've got to have it all perfect. You got to be put together. Right. And so it cuts across gender. It's this normalization of that's unrealistic. And so with clients, whether that's in a one-on-one setting, a group setting, or if I'm doing a larger event, it's helping people realize this is the water that we're in. We might be fish swimming around and not know what the water is. Well, let's name the water. And the water is we're in a culture that fosters burnout and keeps it at bay with shame. And neither of those things are working very well.
Yeah, I'm just taking a note on the culture of shame for sure. And just thinking back to my story, had my coworkers and manager talked about their struggles and shared their struggles and maybe shared some resources that helped them, I wouldn't have felt so alone. Yeah. And I don't think I told one of my coworkers about it as we were kind of just talking, going on a walk, but I never told my manager about it. And now I actually had another kind of burnout episode during COVID where I couldn't do one more Zoom call. It was like, I can't get on, like hyperventilating, like I can't do it. And I did tell my manager that time, and I did advocate for myself. And some things changed with that advocating for myself, but sometimes we just feel so alone. And then to hear someone else share and you say, that's what I'm feeling too. I thought I was the only one. It's so huge. Just the power of sharing.
It is. And what I discovered as I continued through my research, so I went into my book writing project knowing that I had experienced burnout. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the experience for men in that, because I'd read some good things that women had written that were targeted towards women's burnout. And I knew that on the other side, when I finally came out of the burnout cycle, I reflected back and I realized that there was this completely unexpected, wonderful long-term antidote that I had found. But I discovered shame was sitting in the middle. And when I recognized that shame was what was pushing me back into the burnout cycle, what I discovered in hindsight again was realizing that it was being in these places where I could talk to people, whether it was a coworker or whether it was outside groups that I was a member of, communities that I was in, doing support with a professional, whether a therapist or a coach. I've worked with both. Was that sharing the things that felt awful to me, that I was afraid of what people would think about me if I shared them, that every time I did that, things got better. Things got easier. I realized I was actually normal and I was going through a normal human experience. And it created these amazing lasting connections. And that was really the genesis of Expansive Intimacy, which is the title of the book, Expansive Intimacy, How Tough Guys Defeat Burnout. And it was this revelation to me, like, oh, it's talking with people about real stuff that heals me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I love the term normal human experience too, right?
Mm.
Because it is. And the more we share, the more we make it normal. I'm curious about your coaching methods, and I know share what you feel comfortable, but you are
Sure.
talking with a male or anyone who is going through burnout, and they have the symptoms of burnout, exhaustion, cynicism, inefficacy.
Mhm.
They have all the symptoms there. How do you help them get through it, and how long can it take too to
Yeah.
overcome burnout?
Yeah, those are great questions. Taking those in reverse order, it can take quite a while. I mean, I describe burnout as something that we get into through thousands of decisions over multiple years, which could be decades.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no single silver bullet. I get frustrated when I see, the 5 simple steps to tame your burnout kind of posts or articles, because they're just unrealistic. It's not that I'm going to put a series of life hacks in place or time box my calendar or whatever it is, and my burnout's going to be gone. It's reestablishing connection. There's a great article in the New York Times this past weekend, beginning of October, that talked about isolation and loneliness as 2 of the really core features of burnout, and that's been part of our for generations, our upbringing. We're this very individualistic society. And so a lot of times in my coaching, to answer the other part of your question, when people come to me, I find them very lonely. I find them as being alone with their problems. The weight of the world is on their shoulders. Most of the people I'm working with are men who run and own businesses. So they've got this huge set of responsibilities to family, to the people they employ, and they think it's all on them. And wow, talk about a really difficult, lonely place. So a lot of what I do is to start helping them look at other perspectives of what are the ways that you can open that up to other people and take things off of your shoulders so that you can be at your best, because you're clearly not. And usually they don't come to me and say, more and more they're coming to me saying I'm burned out. I think that's another one of those positive outcomes of going through the pandemic, is people are willing to say I'm burned out. But a lot of times they're just like, yeah, I just can't get out of my own way, or I feel stuck, or I feel fuzzy, or I'm really stressed out. And again, that shame is sitting there of, I can't even say I'm burned out, even when maybe I know I am.
Do you help people, just thinking about how this is, individuals are coming to you? Do you help workplaces with these issues as well? Because the workplaces are creating the culture of burnout too. And I
Yeah.
help in my full-time job, I help workplaces with their employee wellness programs. And
Mhm.
sometimes I hear this of, hey, we want to target emotional well-being and mental health in our wellness programs, which it certainly is a great thing to focus on and to promote. But if the culture is not fixing the issues, we're just going to keep going in the same cycle. So do you help workplaces with these issues too?
I do. And that, I'm so glad you brought that question up, Dana. Workplaces are the main source of burnout. They're not the exclusive, but that's where so much of it happens. And it's the culture of workplaces that tell people that they have to keep pushing and that they can't take a break for themselves, and if they're ever going to get ahead. And so a lot of the work that I do, that's why I specifically seek to work with people who lead businesses, because of the impact they can have on other people. There's a multiplier effect. If I can help, a business leader, I might be able to help 75 people at a time because of the influence they have over what that workplace culture is going to be like. Besides working with the leaders, I also do talks in organizations to help open up the conversation around burnout, to help educate what burnout is and what are some of the things that people can start to do about it. And the other thing is to bring in specific types of training around emotional intelligence, because to me, emotional intelligence gets us into this place where we can have the really difficult, sometimes conversations, and also the really connected conversations about what's going on underneath the surface, where we can start to then get to the point of not just healing burnout, but also preventing it. Because if we get ahead of oh, the emotional impact, the impact on somebody's being of what we're doing here is going to be bad in the long run, we can start to take the burnout out of the culture, as our mutual friend Kate Donovan likes to talk about, eliminating burnout culture.
Yeah, and I like that focus on preventing it too, because once you're in it, as you said, it can take years. I mean, there's no set time limit on how, like I said, I did a 1 month program and it did help. I don't think I was fully cured, but it certainly helped alleviate some things, made me see it some different perspectives, but there's no time limit. So once you're in burnout, you could be affected by it for so long. And
Yeah.
if we can prevent that and talk about these things before you're in that place, I mean, that's huge. So I'm so glad to hear that you are talking with leaders and getting them to see that this is an issue and they can help prevent it too for their employees.
Yeah, they have a huge role to play because we follow the leader in
Mm-hmm.
everything. We're always looking towards that example they set. So I really encourage leaders to model that positive behavior. If you tell your workers, turn everything off at 5 o'clock and go home, don't email them at 7 o'clock at night. They're going to respond. They're going to be looking for it. And it's going to tell them what the rules actually are.
Right. And then I think of just this return to work thing, returning to the physical workspace, and employees are being forced to do that. And, workplaces are saying, oh, we're flexible. We want you to be flexible, have this flexibility and autonomy. But, oh, you need to do it in the office. So there's a disconnect there
Mm-hmm.
too, which I know is a whole nother subject, but it's one
Yeah.
example of how, the rules that you set in place can cause burnout for people. And I understand there has to be rules in place, rules, processes, procedures,
Yeah.
but are we keeping people in mind when we set these rules, processes, and procedures?
Exactly. And looking at the long-term cost of making decisions without factoring in what are the conditions that lead people into satisfaction or burnout. And it's scientifically studied. There are 6 factors that contribute to burnout. There's workload, there's control, there's a sense of community, there's fairness, there's values, and reward. And if we know that those 6 things become switches to determine whether we're going to have a burnout culture or not, we can then start to make decisions about, are we opening the office back up and in what way? And we can start to ask the right questions of our employees so we can create conditions where they can thrive and so can our business.
I can't wait to read your book. I'm so excited to get it in the mail. I can't wait to read it and, hopefully and support the males in my life too. And recognizing maybe if they are burned out. But I did want to ask you, you kind of mentioned a few things on men and women and kind of the phrases that they have. Men, man up, and women are, you can't let them see you sweat. You have to be perfect all the time. And while they are similar and different too, I mean, how do you see like men and women differ in their burnout journeys? If
Mm.
there are any differences?
I think if we peel back and look at it in the big picture, there's not much of a difference in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what we experience. I think that for women, a lot of times, and some of this is speculative because I'm not a woman, but like talking to my colleagues and knowing people that I've worked with, some of the burnout that they experience is trying to fight what can oftentimes be an uphill battle as a woman trying to make it in the workplace where the conditions aren't equal and they have to work extra hard to just get the opportunity. For men, I think the burnout comes from those conditions I was describing earlier of we're not supposed to show any struggle. And ironically, the conditions that are set up, the privilege conditions of the patriarchy that open doors for men easily. I had a lot of doors open for me because I'm a white, straight, able-bodied man. I had a fairly easy path. I'm going to say that. And how dare I struggle? It's sort of like, how could I possibly struggle when this system was set up for me? And that feels shameful. And so that there are definitely differences in terms of how we get there. Once we get there, I think it all feels generally the same, the way it sits inside of us. And I think it's important to have that context culturally of, what were the conditions for you as a woman? What are they have they been for me as a man? So that we can start to say, oh yeah, we have to treat this a little differently because we're coming at it from different directions.
I feel that too, that phrase of like, well, I'm struggling in my job, but at least I have a job, right? So I shouldn't complain that
Yeah.
I'm struggling because I should be happy that I have a job. And I remember saying that to someone, and they're like, your experience is your experience. You can't compare it to others, because you're always going to just the comparison never helps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to recognize that you are experiencing these feelings, and it doesn't matter what you're experiencing them about. They're your feelings, and you need to take care of them and nurture them and not overlook them.
Yeah. Yeah. I literally had a boss at one point along my burnout journey say to me, well, at least you have a job. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, that's not helpful.
Right. Yeah. It's not helpful at all. A little bit more empathy, please.
Yes, absolutely. Just a nod to emotional intelligence.
Right. Uh, well, Jim, again, I can't wait to read your book. Thank you for sharing your burnout story. I want to take a quick break, and then talk a little bit about improv and comedy and humor and how you weave those into your workshops and trainings, and also just your improv experience. So we'll switch gears a bit right after this break. Welcome back, everyone, to the Improvly Speaking podcast. And we have our guest, Jim Young, on. And we talked a little bit about burnout, a lot about burnout. We could talk a lot more about burnout, too. But Jim, I want to get into your improv and humor and comedy experience. On your website, it says, at the age of 45, you started a side gig that resulted in you becoming a professional comedian. Tell us about that journey. How did that happen?
Yeah, I followed my kids is the short version of it, which is my kids had started doing improv classes as an after school activity when my oldest, who's 19 now, I think was 8 or 9. And their siblings followed them into it. I have 3 kids. And I was watching the experience that my kids were having in this. And they were having so much fun and also growing and developing. And I thought, are there classes like this for grown-ups? And I found one. I went to an all-day workshop at the age of 45. I'd never done any kind of theater or performance in my life, but I was so intrigued and I absolutely fell in love with it on day one. And fast forward several years, 2019, year before we pandemic hit, I did enough live improv comedy shows for which I got paid small amounts of money, maybe 20 or $25 a show. But I did enough of them that I actually had to pay taxes. I got a 1099 that said,
nice.
You've done enough comedy this year that we need some money from you. And so hence I get to call myself a professional comedian. I've given the IRS money for making people laugh.
That counts. Count it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And I just love that because you can do improv at any age, right? It's not for young. It can be for any age. And they really are very welcoming of all ages too, as long as the instructor can handle it. I mean, it really is a skill that all ages can utilize and help to improve their life. And I want to ask you, how has improv and comedy helped you in your professional life and personal life?
It's been an operating system reinstall is one way I've described it in the past.
I like that term.
I learned so many principles in improv that were profound, simple and profound. Like, accept the scene that you're in, like accepting reality as it is. And that if I just seek to make my scene partner look great and they do the same thing, then we create something we never could have created on our own. There's this freedom, there's this acceptance, there's this connection. It's helped me with relationship skills. I've always been a pretty relational person to begin with, but it just helped me drop some of my own preconceived storylines and just be present to who's in front of me, what's interesting, where's the fun, and following that. And it's really lightened my touch on life in such beautiful ways. And it's opened me up to be able to see things that I never could have seen before because I was too focused on the ideas in my head instead of what was out in front of me.
I love that phrase, lightened my touch, just like made the world a little nicer and it's more fun. Installing more play into your life. As adults, we don't get to play. Like
Yeah.
we just simply don't get that play time, that creativity time to just like to write for 5 minutes, to play a character, to get away from the world. We don't get that play time. And when you do get it, you're like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
so freeing.
And you think about where we do get it and the joy that we receive in those places. So for people who have kids or an aunt or uncle or whatever, when we interface with kids, it lights us up. Or if it's not around childlike play, what are the things we seek out? We seek out theater, movies, we seek out sports, we seek out music. Well, the word play shows up in all of those mediums. We are so drawn to play. And yet we develop this belief as we grow up into adulthood that we shouldn't be playful anymore. And I think it's such a missed opportunity.
I'll just add for you, you mentioned accept the scene you're in, which I know is all about yes and listening and accepting that we are two siblings at the grocery store in this scene. And so if I say, no, we're on planet Jupiter, well, then that kind of discounts what's been said already. So
Yeah.
I love that accept the scene you're in, but that also relates to kind of what we were talking about before we hit the record button of accept how it goes. And we said, whatever we talk about today is what we were meant to talk about. And that's been huge for me in my perfectionism. I
Oh,
grew up a
same.
perfectionist, raised as a perfectionist. So the idea of how it turns out is how it was meant to go. How that scene went is how it was meant to go
Yeah.
is huge for me. Yes, there are tweaks you can make. You can make better choices to make the scene a little easier, but how it played out is how it played out. And there's no need to like go back and ruminate on it anymore. It already happened. We move on because if
Yeah.
you're ruminating on how bad that scene was, or, oh, I said this weird thing, you're not listening to what's going on in the scene that's going on. So you miss everything, right?
Yeah. You might even miss the fun of the weird thing you said was where
Yes.
the joy was going to take off from. As
Yeah,
a
you're going to
fellow,
miss the fun. Yeah.
yeah, as a fellow recovering perfectionist, improv has also been one of the huge, it's been the number one remedy for me to realize that was just never working, that being messy, letting it come out the way it's going to come out and seeing what happens from there is so much easier.
I feel all of that. And that's been huge in my life. Because all these skills that you mentioned, which I think get labeled as quote unquote soft skills in the working place, because it goes to the emotional intelligence, right? That relates to emotional intelligence, but these really are essential skills to relationship building, to working with other people. I mean, they're essential. They're not quote unquote soft. They're essential skills.
They're the hard skills, things like
They are.
listening openly, and instead of I'm formulating my thoughts before you finish speaking and now I didn't really catch what you said. I mean, that's hard for a lot of people. I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, and so that leads to your trainings. You use improv, you do applied improv trainings. Do you use do you use applied improv in your burnout trainings, or do you do separate ones? How do you incorporate these skills into your trainings?
I most often use applied improv when I'm teaching emotional intelligence. I think it's a wonderful combination. Emotional intelligence isn't something that I think is best learned by a lecturer standing up and reading slides, having the content come at you. I think it's better when it's coming through you. And so I just did about a month ago a series of workshops for a big Fortune 20 company who brought me in to help with their leadership development program. And they wanted me to teach emotional intelligence. And I said, sure, I'm going to do it through applied improv. And they're like, huh? And I explained to them what I meant, which was I'm going to lead your people through a series of low stakes interactive exercises that are rooted in techniques we use on stage in improv shows, but are not about anybody having to get up and perform anything, but that we use those same techniques for people to do low stakes activities that teach them the skills they need when they're in the real high stakes situation. They're in a meeting with a client or their peers, and they can start to draw on, oh, how did I use assertiveness? Or how did I use empathy? Or how did I practice emotional self-awareness in that situation? It's one of my most favorite things to do, is to use applied improv in that mode.
I love that term, low stakes interactive exercises. Basically, like you don't have to get up and do scenes where you create things, because that is hard. I've been doing improv for 3 years. It's still hard for me to do scenes. So I would never ask someone who improv isn't on their radar. I would never ask them to get up and do that. But giving a specific exercise that relates to what you're talking about, it allows them to experience it and then develop takeaways based on their experience, rather than you being a talking head and going, wah, 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 you should do this, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. And everybody's checked out and said, when I have to do it, and I have to experience the vulnerability of trying a new skill when I'm doing that with somebody else. Well, I just taught empathy without even trying, because people are having this experience of like, oh man, what's it like to be that other person right now? One of the exercises I love doing is called 1,000-year gap. And one person is from the present day and the other person is from 1,000 years ago. And the present day person has to explain to the other person how a smartphone works. And it's this wonderful exercise in communication, in creativity, but also in empathy, because wow, what must it be like to try and understand somebody from the modern day, or to try and understand somebody from 1,000 years ago, and start to see each other for the differences we have and how we're trying to come together in a common way.
That's one of my favorite exercises as well. I hear it called different things, but I love that exercise to highlight empathy and empathetic communication, because it sounds easy enough when you're explained how to do the exercise, and then you get into it and you realize all the, like, the rabbit holes you're going down. Oh, well, the phone can take a picture. What's a picture? What's a camera? Right. Like, and then you got to explain what camera. Oh, it's got a button, and
you like the thing that keeps my shirt together, a button.
Right. Yeah. And you keep going down these rabbit holes and you make it harder on yourself, and you realize, okay, less is more. And my takeaway from that exercise has always been how nice I am to that person, because I recognize that they don't know and understand.
Yeah.
But I don't always bring that empathy into my communication with others. Sometimes I'm like, come on, keep up. Stop asking questions. Let's go. We're running behind, kind of thing. And I'm not empathetic, because I'm not taking the time to realize they don't know what I know. They're not coming at it from the same place as I am. I need to be more empathetic and give them more information. So I love that exercise. It is one of my favorites too.
Yeah. And our fast pace, we have to get it done working world. We don't slow down enough to make sure people are understanding and are there along with us, and they're not just nodding like, yeah, sure. Cause I don't want to tell you, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't want to seem like I'm dumb. And then we wonder, like, how come that didn't get done right? Like, why did they drop the ball? Well, we didn't really communicate well. We didn't take the time.
Yep. Yeah. And communication goes such a long way. Those same communication channels, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and to just talk to people like people. I mean, that also helps with burnout. So I love that you're incorporating all of it. From a public speaking standpoint, you're leading these trainings. What do you like about facilitating these sessions and speaking in front of people? And did you ever struggle with public speaking and speaking in front of people?
It's interesting. I struggled with it for a long time because I was shy as a kid. I was anxious as a teenager. I remember my junior year of college, I had to give a class presentation, and I was a slacker in college, and I had blown off a couple classes in this course when we picked books that we were going from a set of books we were going to present on, and we had to team up with people in the class. And I just went to class on the day we were supposed to choose, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to read Guardians at the Gate. And the teacher was like, oh, we eliminated that book 3 weeks ago, so nobody else was interested. I was like, oh shit. I had to give the presentation by myself, and it actually really helped me because I just had to get over it. I didn't have anyone to lean on. I had to be in the spotlight, and I did really well. And so now when I'm presenting, and I think improv has greatly helped with this, I don't worry so much. First, I only talk about things that I know. So I usually don't have to feel like I've super prepared. I just get to talk about things that I'm passionate about and where I feel like I can open up the room. For me, if I'm talking the whole time in one of the events that I do, it's a failure. It's not about me. I'm a conduit to open up a space, ideally for stories to come out, for laughter to happen, for connection to be built. That's the ultimate takeaway if I'm doing the work right.
That's what I enjoy about the applied improv sessions and workshops too, is that you don't have to speak for the hour. And in fact, that's not beneficial if you do. People can get a lot more out of it by doing the exercises. And sometimes, you have to set the stage, right? You have to let people know, hey, you will be asked to do exercises. This is not a sit and check out kind of workshop. Like, you're going to have to participate.
That's
and
right.
sometimes there's like moans and groans, like, oh, I got to get up and talk to somebody. But usually, I'll say for most people, it is worth it after, because they have fun, they laugh, and they get to experience some takeaways too.
Yeah, I like to let people know that within the first 5 minutes, they're part of the action and get them up and moving and participating, whether it's just talking to each other or some kind of group interactive activity. Because ultimately people want that. They might be a little bit intimidated at first. And so a lot of it's around making it safe, that, nobody has to do it right. And if you really don't feel like you can participate, you get to step out, but just give it a try. Do your best. And I rarely find somebody who's like, I'm not going to do this. People really want to interact with each other ultimately.
Yeah, that psychological safety is a huge thing to mention in these sessions, but also in that relates to burnout too. I mean, if you are feeling psychologically safe in your workplace to speak up and advocate for yourself, and it goes a long way. So psychological safety is not just for presentations. It really can span the whole workplace too.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask you about your improv experience. You've been doing it for a while now. From my experience, improv is hard, right?
Yeah.
When you start, most people, myself included, are not good at it. And I'm still struggling with this a bit 3 years in, and I'm better now. When I first started improv, I would have a bad scene or a bad class, and I would leave going, oh my God, like, I'm just not good at this. Like, the perfection was really coming in, like, oh, this is so hard. God, if I had only said this one thing, it would have made this so much better. And I would dwell on it for like days almost. So question for you in this perfection element, if you have a bad scene, a bad class, or even a bad show, quote unquote, whatever bad means to you, how do you keep going?
That has absolutely been part of the work, part of the practice. And I've had the exact same experience as you. Is, in a rehearsal on a Wednesday night with a class of 10 people, and I get up and I do a 2-person scene, and I'm like, oh my God, that was so stupid. I can't believe, and like, I'm perseverating over it for a couple of days. Like, why? Who cares? Nobody. And over time, as I've continued the practice of recognizing that my judgment just gets in the way of the fun and the joy, I do it less. And it doesn't mean that I can always show up as present as I want to. A lot of it for me has been finding the psychological safety, as you were just talking about, of playing and performing in a troupe that I've been with for 5 years, and we have full trust in each other, so much care amongst each other, and a knowledge that on any given night when we show up to do a live show, somebody's not going to have it that night. Stuff going on, whatever, you just may not have a great show by whatever standard you might have, and know that that's fine because we have it as a group and nobody has to be the star.
That's beautiful. Just that trust in your teammates, in yourself too, that you know what to do. You're going to get through the scene. I wrote down as you were talking, just the judgment gets in the way of the fun and joy, because it really can. Judgment is a fun and joy killer, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the more that we can just let it be what it was and stay present with what's next. Oftentimes I'll do something that I might have in the past labeled as like, oh, why did I even do that? And if I can just stay with it in the moment, it might transform into something magical, because I might let my scene partner take care of that. They might pick it up and turn it into something fun because I stumbled over something and I'm thinking, oh, I wish I said it right. Well, what I just stumbled over might be gold, and they might dig it up with me.
Yeah. And that reminds me too, I'm always in my head going, oh, people are so quick. Like, how did they think of that? I wish I could think like that. And it's like we bring different skills and traits to the table. So what someone picks up on, great. Like, that's why we're on a team together, because I might have missed it. They picked up on it. Now we have magic in the scene. And something that I pick up on is something they didn't even think about. So that's the beauty of teamwork and trust and working together. But so often I'm like, oh, so stupid. Why didn't I think of that? That would have been great, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. We all have our gifts to bring.
Yeah, exactly. And we give gifts to our scene partners. We make our scene partners look good. If we don't have that judgment and that whole, I got to be a star and I got to look good. When you make your scene partner look good, you look good as well.
Yeah. I often have people, when I first tell them that I do improv comedy, they'll, within a few sentences, say something to me about me doing stand-up. I'm like, no, I don't do stand-up. That's me standing up there trying to be the funny guy telling jokes by myself. I do improv, which is a team activity in which I never try to tell a joke. I just try to be a real version of a human being and watch what funny things happen from those lifelike interactions. And that's so much more fun to me. I don't know how people do stand up. That seems really hard.
It's on my list of things to do or try because it scares me. So because it scares me, I feel I should do it and just try it. And I think it'll help in public speaking delivery. So it's definitely on the list. I wanted to do it this year. This year's ending quickly, but I'm saying it right now. It's on my list of things to do in 2023. And I don't see it as something I will love, but it's just a challenge. I love the team aspect of improv, and it's. So stand up just seems so hard to be on the stage by yourself, all eyes on you, and you fail or succeed by whatever metrics you deem as successful. Like you fail or succeed on your own, basically up there.
Well, and the feedback there is it's pretty tight loop. You either get the laugh or you don't. So
right, exactly. Yeah,
the metric
that's
is
the
clear.
success metric.
Yeah.
Whereas improv too, I mean, certainly the laugh is the success. But there's a lot of like dramatic improv too that isn't focused on the laugh, and it's more about like creating a relatable human experience. And I have had a teacher say, if you get the audience to say, "Aw," like you've won. They're on your side.
Yeah, you've triggered some emotion. You've somehow brought their spirit forth. I often refer these days to improv as a spiritual experience for me, because we have 60 or 70 people coming to one place to gather in search of laughter, which lifts our spirits. It's a spiritual place.
I love that. That's, gosh, all these good low stakes interactive exercises, spiritual experience. Judgment gets in the way of fun and joy. I'm taking in so much from this conversation. I love it.
Mm. Yeah, it's fun to riff on improv. I can do that all day.
Yeah, right. Well, and I want to switch gears one more time to your book and talk about the book is called Expansive Intimacy: How Tough Guys Defeat Burnout. And it sounds like maybe, I mean, you've tried many different things. Improv has helped with that. Can you tell me what expansive intimacy means and why did you want to write a book about it?
Yeah, first, I want to see if you can guess what my dedication is in the book. It's one word. It's to.
Well, I'm cheating because you've already told me, but it's to improv, right?
Yes, I forgot I told you that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. So
Yeah.
it's a perfect segue. Yeah, the one of the most powerful inspirations for everything I learned in there was improv. But what expansive intimacy is, it's an antidote to burnout. It is the opposite of burnout. It's where we go away from the isolation of dealing with the stresses that we have according to these confined conditions, and instead reach out across every aspect of our lives, our friends, our family, our colleagues, intimate quote unquote partner, a romantic partner, and create these deep bonds, these connections where we can be real. We can be ourselves, whether we're grieving, celebrating, stressing, or anything else. When we have that, and we have that in all these different directions in our lives, these expansive directions, we can use intimacy as a place to make sure we don't get into burnout because we have people to support us.
Well, and this was recent on your LinkedIn. You posted that you were trying to start up some social media channels, and with the hashtag or the tagline "Expansive Intimacy," right?
Yeah.
And it got blocked because of the title. So
Yeah, I like, as I said in that post on LinkedIn, I'm apparently hashtag way too hot for IG. Which is like ridiculous. If you know me, I'm a pretty not conservative, but I don't think I'm that offensive or provocative in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I literally created an account where the handle was Expansive Intimacy, and it had one post of the cover of my book, which is very innocuous. My book is not at all, I shouldn't say it's not at all about sexual intimacy. There's certainly a little bit in there because that's a form of intimacy, but that's like 0.5% of what I write about. And to be blocked because I violated the community guidelines, it just made me realize, like, wow, as a society, we have this euphemistic view of what intimacy is. And that's not all that it is. It's so much more.
And if we looked at it as so much more, like how much more would we experience intimacy with others on just a regular level? It doesn't have to be on a sexual level. Like we need that intimacy as humans to thrive. And when we're not getting it, that is what is leading to that isolation, loneliness, and burnout. Yeah, that's huge.
And shorter, less happy lives. The study of adult development by Harvard, which is the longest running experiment on human happiness, uncovered 7 things we can do to live a long, happy life. And you could guess what a lot of them are. They're around exercise and not smoking and drinking in moderation and having spiritual practice. But one of the elements on that list was having intimate connections, intimate relationships, these deep relationships that support us socially in our lives. And they go on to say this. There's an article that Arthur Brooks, who writes a series for The Atlantic on wellness, essentially quotes this study, and he says, talking to the director of the study, if we could only choose one of those 7 habits to give ourselves the best chance of a long, happy life, it's intimate connection.
That's huge because I'm in wellness. I help companies with their employee wellness programs. And in my master's program, I focused a lot on physical activity. And physical activity has always been huge in my life, and it's been so beneficial. And yes, it is one part to living a longer, healthier life. But, if you have those other parts missing and you have that intimacy missing, you're not going to want to be active and you're not going to want to do the things that help your body. So
Yeah.
I do agree. Yeah, that intimacy is really what is missing a lot of times right now, post pandemic or whatever part where you're in the pandemic. That is what's missing
Hmm.
right now for sure.
Yeah. And you're right. It does influence the other behaviors and habits positively. If we have people in our lives who care about us, that we communicate with on a deep level, and we're not doing well, they might ask us like, "Hey, how's it going? Like, can I help you out with X, Y, Z? Let's go out for a walk, right? Get some exercise." It's what we need to thrive mentally, which then affects our ability to thrive physically, emotionally. Yeah.
It's so huge. And so how was your intimacy with the book when you were writing it?
Mm.
How was your experience with writing a book? That's such a huge endeavor. I admire everyone who writes books and is an author. You're an author now. How was it?
Yeah. I really admire people who are authors now that I actually wrote a book, because
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much I knew a little going in. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of a big deal. I'd thought about it for years, but I kept putting it off, putting it off. And then I was ready. And the first 6 months of it, where I did a lot of the manuscript writing, actually felt really energizing. There were definitely some challenges. I was fitting that in while raising 3 teenagers. I have them half time, doing a full-time job. I'm in a romantic relationship that's long distance. I do my improv, shows and all that. So I had a lot of life going on around it, but I loved it. It was a ton of learning for myself, just on the topics I was writing about, a lot of connection with people, and then getting into the actual revisions and putting it into a finished product. It was a lot to carry mentally, and I loved it because I really cared deeply about what I was writing about, that I thought, well, if I do a good job with this could help a lot of people.
And just curious about your writing process. Did you allow for intimacy with others and connection with others during the process? Because so many times you hear, oh, I got to go to this cabin in the woods to write my book
Mm-hmm.
and isolate to focus. But was your experience a little different? You needed intimacy and connection with others to keep going?
Yeah, I'm glad you re-asked that part of the question, because I think it's become second nature for me now. So yes, I purposely signed up for a book writing program or manuscript
Oh,
writing program
nice.
that was cohort based, because I thrive in groups, and I have this ongoing set of relationships, which continues to happen when I do these group kind of experiences, that I find a handful of people or 10 people that I connect with, and we're still supporting each other. Our books are launching, we're out in the world, and we have a group chat that's going on, and I had a call um, 3 days ago, and I got another one in a couple of days, where we're helping each other with different aspects of how do we get our books out into the world. And so I've made new friends. I've had support throughout. I got feedback from a lot of people, really vulnerable stuff, which creates more intimacy as we share the things that we feel vulnerable about. We get the reflection back of like, wow, thanks for sharing that. I see you. And so, yeah, I absolutely created more friends, more connections, and used intimacy throughout the process to make it easier for me.
Yeah, you don't have to go out in the woods and isolate from everyone. Certainly, it takes a lot of discipline to sit down and write every day and hit your deadlines. But if you're closing yourself off from the world, and that's not you, that's going to affect your writing process. So that's amazing to hear you had this group of supporters. And I love the term intimacy too. I always use the word connection, but I
Mm.
kind of want to switch to using intimacy now to just get the world not labeling it as a sexual intimacy. Like it's just
Yeah.
human interactivity, it's intimacy, it's connection. I love that as a synonym.
Yeah, I want to destigmatize it, or um, how do you euphemism, whatever that is?
Right.
I want to make it not a euphemism for sex, because I think that's why Instagram banned me, because they thought I was writing something about everybody having sex everywhere by saying expansive intimacy. That's not it. It's, how do we reveal ourselves? How do we reveal our real humanity? And, kind of chiming on something I said earlier about how do we reveal what's really going on underneath for us to other people in ways that supports us from not having to stress out about it.
I love this conversation, Jim. This has been amazing. I want to ask you, and I'm curious too, as a new business owner, at the age of 48, on your website, you say you finally left the safety, quote unquote safety, which we've talked a lot about, the safety of your career to start your dream business, which has now included writing a book.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for anyone thinking about starting a business? How can they take that leap? How can they say yes and to themselves and their ideas?
Yeah, there's an expression that I learned over the past few years, that there is a place for all of us where our deep gifts meet a great need in the world. We all have something to bring out into the world that gets us excited and gets other people served, helps them with something that they need. And a lot of what I've learned in the last 4 years of this journey of going from having a corporate paycheck for the majority of my adult life to I have to figure it all out, or better yet, I get to figure it all out, is that if I lean into the things that I am really excited about helping people with, then those people will find me. And it's not as neat and tidy as that. I would never pretend that you can just decide like, hey, I'm really awesome at, creating macrame wall hangings, and I know there are people who want those, and I'm going to create a sustainable business. There are stages where we have to do practical things to make money along the way, but continuing to just ask yourself, what do I want? How can I serve people best? What would get me excited? And the more we tap into that, the more we start to attract the people who want exactly that. And it can be risky and vulnerable, and it requires a ton of courage. And the more that we're willing to be ourselves, the more we find the people who are like, oh, you're the one that I've been looking for this whole time, and I really want to support you, and I want your help.
Yeah, you'll find your crowd, you'll find your people, but you've got to be willing, and I'm saying this for myself too, to confirm and affirm, you've got to be willing to put yourself out there and have that vulnerability to do it. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to leave the safety of your cushion if that's not feasible. But if that's something you're thinking about, you'll find a way to do it. But it takes a lot of work, and it can be done. You just got to be willing to do the work.
And you don't have to follow the path that I followed, and nor should you. Anyone who might be listening, is that I needed to leave corporate America and go start a business of my own. That's what was right for me. But there are plenty of paths to follow within the job you already have, or in another company doing a similar job. It's just getting clear about what is it that would really light me up, and where can I do that? And then asking for support, finding those groups that will support you along the way, finding a coach, finding a best friend, finding an accountability buddy, whatever. Like, just don't do it yourself. That's the hard path. Doing it with support from other people and feedback, that's what's going to get you there.
It all goes back to intimacy, right? Finding your connections, finding your intimacy with other people, like-minded people to help you along the way. You don't have to go at it alone.
And just like we said before the show, we don't know where it's going to lead. And if we can take that mindset into that process too, of like, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to enjoy it along the way, and I'm going to be connected with other people, and I might get surprised by the destination. Well, that's a pretty cool journey too.
This has been amazing. Jim, I've got one last question for you. Where and how can our listeners find out more about you? Because this has been so fun. You have a wealth of knowledge to give. Where can they find out more about you?
Thanks, Dana. The best place to find out about me is my website, thecenteredcoach.com. There's a page there for people who are interested in the book. There's a page for the kind of work that I do. And I also share a lot of my stories because I think, again, sharing vulnerably, helping people normalize their experience and be ready to take that next risk is what I want to be trying to do.
Awesome. And you're also on LinkedIn, right? You're always sharing really good posts.
Yes.
You're in my algorithm and I see them all the time and always liking and celebrating what you're posting. They're great.
Yeah, thank you. They haven't kicked me out yet for being too hot for LinkedIn, but maybe someday.
Right. Which is interesting because you would think LinkedIn would be a little bit more particular about that
You
since
would
it's a
think.
professional.
Maybe they
But too
get
hot for
intimacy.
IG.
That's right. Too hot for IG. Look for the hashtag. You'll find me.
Oh, that's funny. And you can find your book on Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. The book page on my website has all of that. My LinkedIn uh, link is on my website as well. So I usually just say, go to thecenteredcoach.com. You can find pretty much any place I hang out, but those are basically the three places you'll find me. The Amazon page for the book, my website, LinkedIn. That's about where I tend to hang out.
Awesome. And I am getting the book this week, I hope. You said it's in the mail, so I'll be getting your book this week. I look forward to reading it and learning from you and all the things you share there. And I know it's been a ton of work and effort, so I appreciate you doing it and sharing it with us.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your feedback, whatever it might be, when you've had a chance to read it, because I get to learn from that.
Yeah, yeah. Any comedy shows or improv shows to plug?
Yeah, if anybody's in the Northeast, Western Massachusetts, to be specific, come on out to Happier Valley Comedy in Hadley. That's where I perform every month, third Saturday of every month. My group is a bunch of high achieving people who are always, on. And so our group is naturally called Not in Charge. And we do a true storytelling based show that's always we just have a ton of fun together. And again, it's one of those spiritual experiences where we all get to come together and laugh.
I love that. Not in Charge. That's such a great team name.
It really describes us, what we all strive for, is to be not in charge.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Well, Jim, one last question for you as we wrap up. Any last tips or thoughts to leave our listeners with if they are experiencing burnout? Hearing this, listening to this, they might think, oh my God, I think I might be in burnout. Like, any last tips or thoughts for our listeners?
I think the most important thing to me, if somebody is feeling that, is to not think there's something wrong with me, to instead have a conversation with somebody. It could be your manager at work. It could be HR. It could be your best friend. It could be a coach. It could be a therapist. Just start talking about it until you're clear about what it is. And if it is burnout, there are resources out there that can help you.
Yeah. That's been a common theme in this discussion. You are not alone. You don't have to go at it alone in multiple different areas of life. Intimacy is a gift and you can use it in your life to help you get through this.
Yeah.
I've learned so much, Jim. I appreciate you being on, sharing this with me and with my listeners, with our listeners. It's huge. You're doing amazing work in the world, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Dana, thank you so much for getting to come on and improvly speak with you.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. I'm making improvly a word now, and we definitely did. We improvly spoke today, and we had a blast doing it. For our listeners, thank you for listening in today and joining the conversation. I really appreciate you being here. You heard Jim's story about his burnout journey and where it's led him, and also how he's used humor and creativity to help him in this journey and in this process too. So I want to ask you to think about what it is that you're struggling with and how can you navigate past your roadblocks and challenges. And I realize that there are a lot of systemic issues and roadblocks and challenges out there that cannot be individually fought. But the more that you speak up and share and advocate for yourself, the more that you're advocating for others as well in the process, whether it's gender, race, religion, any of those demographics. The more that you advocate and share your story, the more that we realize, oh, we're not alone. Oh, I'm not the only one having this issue. So please feel free to share with me. If you're not comfortable sharing with others, I'm always happy to listen to anything going on. You can reach out to me at dana@improvispeaking.com. That's DAYNA at improvispeaking.com. Let me know what's going on, any creative passions you're doing, or any obstacles that are pushing up against you. How can you get over them? Jim and I met in an accountability group, a risk takers accountability group last year, and we've kept in touch ever since. And you heard Jim, and he had an accountability group for writing, and it helped him get through the writing process when he was writing his book. Accountability goes a long way, and I'm happy to be in your corner cheering you on in whatever you're trying to get through. So please share, and we can work through our roadblocks and obstacles together. You can also reach out to me on social media if that's easier or more preferred. On Instagram, I'm at Improvly Speaking. On LinkedIn, I'm Dana Gowan. And you can also find out more information at improvispeaking.com. Also, this is a new podcast, so all your subscribes, likes, and reviews will really help in getting the word out about this podcast that's about public speaking, improv, communication, performance, creativity, and everything in between. I really run the range of topics here, but I like that because it gives us a lot to talk about. And also, we have a lot of fun because improvisers are super fun people to have on. So we have some good conversations there. So please like and subscribe. Let me know what you think. You can email me again at dana@improvispeaking to let me know your thoughts. Finally, I just want to encourage you all to take care of yourself and really check in to see if you are burned out or heading towards burnout. Men, women, gender binary people, all genders, we all have probably experienced some effects of burnout to some degree, especially in the past 2 to 3 years. Please, please, please get help where you can. Know that you are not alone. Common theme in this podcast, you are not alone. Listen to others' shared experiences. Know that you are not alone in this experience. Please share and advocate for yourself. In doing that, you are advocating for others too. Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Improvly Speaking. I had a blast on this conversation. I hope you did as well. I'll talk to you next time.